Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, our topic is attack. When we're attacking, at one point the time comes when we need to convert our nice looking position, our attack, to material advantage. And we are going to look at some of those situations in this lesson, played by some of the most famous and best attacking players of all times. Let's get started with our first example, which was played by no other than Garry Kasparov against the Czech Shibil, international master. In this position, White has a very far advanced passed pawn on d7, which obviously is a big treasure. At the moment, Black is guarding the promotion square on d8, so it doesn't seem so simple how to make progress. Also, at the moment, the white rook is hanging, being attacked by Black's bishop. Interestingly, it's exactly by giving up that very dangerous passed pawn on d7 that results in advancing White's cause. In reality, what White wants to achieve is to get his rook to d7. In other words, White would like to capture his own pawn. Of course, he cannot do that. However, what White can do is, White can, right now, instead of retreating the rook, advancing the d pawn. Before we look at some specific moves, I'd like to also point out that it's extremely important that the Black king is in a weakened position, mostly because the g7 pawn already has advanced at an earlier stage of the game to g6. So let's see how exactly it works out after White advances the d pawn to a queen. Right now, Black can capture the newly born queen with either the rook or the bishop. Black in the game chose to capture with the bishop, but first let's see why not with the rook. If Black would choose to take with the rook, White would trade rooks and immediately get the most dangerous attacking piece into the game by playing queen f7. It's a very, very powerful move, on one hand threatening to checkmate on f8, and there are no easy ways to defend against that. And if now Black responds with queen d5, the only seemingly suitable defense, in hopes that after the check the queen would block and also, by the way, protect the bishop on d8, then White would all of a sudden trade queens and change plans and simply play rook d1 and then capture Black's knight on d5. Black is in a skewer. So let's go back all the way to the beginning and see what happened in the game after White advanced the d pawn and Black in the game chose to capture with the bishop. Now White continued by positioning the queen on the long diagonal with queen c3, using the moment that Black is unable to block this check on f6 because it's not supported with enough defensive pieces, and the king now needs to move out of check. And now the time arrived to play rook d7, another very good move. Of course, immediately threatening to checkmate with queen g7. The knight is pinned, so therefore it cannot move to e6. Rook f7 fails to rook takes bishop. So really Black's only reasonable move is playing bishop to f6. This of course not only stops the checkmate threat, but also attacks White's queen. And now White returned with the queen to c4, forcing the king back to the corner, and queen f4. Very good move. On one hand, using the pin, attacking the knight on c7 a second time, but not less importantly, the queen is also eyeing to go to h6. Now Black is already in serious trouble. The knight on c7 is lost no matter what, and Black here continued by playing queen h6. Then after queen h6, things are even worse than just losing a rook, as now white threatens to checkmate in two different ways by capturing the pawn as well as the rook. It would have been slightly better for black to move the bishop back to g7, but also then white's advantage is quite clear after capturing the knight, and then the pawn on a7 is hanging, and white's next plan would be to double up the rooks on the 7th rank, although this would have certainly made the game last quite a bit longer than it did in the actual game. Let's move on to some other games that were played also by great attacking players. The next one, white, was played by Mikhail Tal, the magician from Riga, as he's also being called. His opponent was actually another very great attacking player, the Yugoslav Velimirovic, but in this game he was on the suffering side. Right now we can see that white has started an attack a while back, which resulted on one hand white sacrificing a piece. Note that black is a bishop ahead right now, and on the other hand white achieved something significant, and that is that the black king is wandering around in the middle of the board. So that means that the black king is certainly in a very sensitive position. Now yet another very important thing to recognize in this position is that the white queen being on h3 and the rook on f5 on the same diagonal as black's king potentially result in a very powerful discovery. In fact, white may play right now, right away, rook to d5 using a pin on that diagonal. However, that wouldn't be sufficient, as the black king would start running and still hanging on to the queen on e6. So let's go back again to the position we started with and look for a way for white to gain material advantage out of the situation we already have. As we can see, white doesn't have that many pieces left to attack with, only the queen and two rooks. So it's certainly time to convert the nice position to gaining some of the material back or more. I suggest you take some minutes and try to figure out what you would do here if you would have the white pieces. Well, one thing white certainly would like to see, and that is the black queen moving from where it is right now. Imagine if the black queen would need to move. Most likely the white rook would be able to move to some place and give a discovered check and then capture black's queen. So that's exactly what white needs to be looking for. How to get that queen away from e6. And the elegant move that white found in the game was moving the rook to e4, a very strong move attacking black's queen. Of course, you may say, but this is a rook sacrifice. The black queen right now can capture white's rook. That is certainly true, but if that's what black would respond with, then white could simply give a discover check and grab black's queen. So, in the game after rook e4, black captured white's pawn on a2. It was the only square on the board actually where the queen could go without the white rook making a discovery and then capturing the queen. But nevertheless, white is still in a winning position because after the discovery with rook capturing the pawn on c5, black resigned, the reason being that now, okay, the queen is not lost, but the rook on c8 certainly will be. And moreover, the black king will be checkmated real soon, being in the middle of the board. For example, after king d6, Even better than just capturing the rook would be check, king e7, and checkmate in the middle of the board. As we know, keeping your king uncastled in the middle of the board, oftentimes even with having material advantage, such as in this position, is very, very risky and usually does not end well. Let's move on to our next example, where in this example Black was Stein, the late Soviet grandmaster, who was an excellent attacking player in the 1960s and early 70s, and his opponent in this game was the Yugoslav grandmaster Ljubojevic, who also is very famous for his uncompromising attacking style. But in this case he got into trouble quite early on because he didn't castle timely. If White would have his turn and would have the opportunity to castle, Black would be certainly not having any realistic attacking chances. But because the White king hasn't castled yet, Black is ready to strike. And again we reached one of those moments when the question is, how do we transform our initiative, our attack, to material gain? Try to think, and hopefully quickly enough you will know the answer yourself. And the elegant combination was Black capturing on f2. Of course, this is a knight sacrifice, which if White does not accept, then simply the two white rooks are forked and White will lose one of them. On the other hand, if White captures the knight, then Black will respond by playing bishop takes c3, a simple exchange which is quite powerful because the Black knight will appear on e4 quickly enough. If the queen takes, then it will fork White's king and queen. So White decided instead, after knight f2, to sacrifice an exchange, which of course didn't work out too well. After White castled, Black just captured the rook, bishop captured back, and Black played bishop g4. Came h3, bishop took. Black, being an exchange and a pawn up, doesn't mind exchanging further pieces. Bishop f3, and came a5, a typical move for such situations, preventing White playing b4. And White's answer was knight d5, c6, another exchange of minor pieces, queen d4. And again, another key moment, the Black king doesn't need to move. It's very important, because for example, if the king would move back to g8, that would be quite bad, because knight f6 would force the Black king onto a discovery, and then White would at least win an exchange back. So therefore, the good move here for Black is to play f6. Came knight f4. Now the knight had to move away from the attack, and Black simply connects his rooks on the back rank. White played king h1 and rook fe8, putting further pressure on the e3 pawn. White played queen d2, Black did capture the pawn, came queen d6 and queen e5. Of course, being up in material, Black would be more than happy to exchange queens and get to an endgame. And White was trying to avoid it, but now rook a d8, White is in trouble. White took the pawn, and now, better than just capturing the knight on f4, which would allow White also capture the Black knight on c5, a much better move, knight e4, a very powerful move, in a way a discovery. offering an exchange of queens, and the problem for white is that black also threatens at the same time to play knight g3. And white's position is hopeless and lost the game within a couple of moves. And let's see our final example in this lesson. Here we go. This is another attacking game of Leonid Stein against the Hungarian Grandmaster Lengyel. It was white's turn, and white has a nice position with the two bishops on the two long diagonals, one rook already on the open file, and the white bishop and queen pasting towards black's kingside. White continued by playing queen f5 in this position, when black made an immediate blunder in this game by playing rook f to d8. It looks like a logical move, with the idea to then exchange rooks and then try to put the second rook also on d8, trying to exchange that as well, and try to get to an endgame with symmetrical pawn structure. Even though having a pair of bishops, that would be also at least a little better for white. But after rook f to d8, white has a way to actually trap the black queen, and that's exactly what white did. Bishop e5. It's pretty elegant how those two bishops and queen and rook take away all the squares from black's queen. Let's see now what may have happened if black plays instead rook to d8 with the other rook. This is a move that was recommended after the game that Stein won in the early 70s. And somebody have followed that recommendation about 25 years later, and there was another game that continued just like this. Now white played bishop d5, centralizing the bishop, avoiding the exchange of rooks, and putting pressure on f7. Black played queen c8, trying to exchange queens, which is generally a good idea. When you're under attack, you're trying to exchange pieces. But white, of course, having the opposite goal and keeps the queens on the board. Came knight d7 and bishop e4. Deadly threat. Of course, knight f6 doesn't help because white's bishop is on b2 and would capture black's knight immediately. Came g6, but this of course weakens significantly the long diagonal of dark squares. Queen returned to f3, and now the idea of white is to just play rook c1, get that rook activated as well, and then get the queen to c3 and try to checkmate along this diagonal. After queen f3, black played f6, trying to cut off the power of the bishop on the diagonal. However, this just made things worse because now the light squares on the other diagonal become weak. And white again continues with rook c1, attacking the queen, queen b8, and queen g4. Now trouble from all sides. White is threatening to simply capture the knight. White is also threatening to capture on g6, as well as with a queen check on e6. So as we can see, trouble from all directions. Came knight e5 and queen e6 check, rook f7, and after rook d8, black had enough of the suffering, as the upcoming rook c8 would result in significant material gains for white. And finally, let's see the jewel of the week. Here we are. In this knight endgame, it seems at first that it must be a draw, or if anybody needs to worry, it's white, because right now the black knight on d5 is forking two of the white pawns on b4 and f4. Nevertheless, if white finds the correct sequence of moves, is winning by force. Try to think, figure out on your own before you listen to the actual solution. And white continued right now by playing knight f5, king e6, and it's like a knight dance. Knight g7. White needs to make forceful moves, otherwise the black knight would just capture one of the white pawns. Came king d6 and knight e8. Check. As you can see, white keeps giving checks. If right now the black king would move down to attack the white knight, white happily would exchange knights and then just go after either of the black pawns with king e6 and then grab the one on f6, or alternatively go to c6 and grab the other pawn, and white would have a very easily won pawn endgame then. So let's go back to the beginning one more time. We started with knight f5 check, king e6, knight g7 check, king d6, knight e8 check, and now if the king goes to e6, white of course will not continue giving knight checks, but will deflect the king from the protection of the knight. And king takes, and now the simplest method of winning is just give up the knight for the f6 pawn, making sure that will not be a danger, and run after the b6 pawn and basically build everything on that pawn, becoming a queen. Alternatively, if after again the beginning moves knight f5, king e6, knight g7, king d6, knight e8, the black king goes the other direction to c6, then white gives the check with the other pawn, and then again the same exact idea in white giving eventually up the pawn for black's passed pawn, while the white king goes after black's other pawn in front of the white pawn and promoting the f pawn. And finally, if we go back to the beginning, after knight f5, if the black king would go c6 right away, of course we would play b5 right away and then winning black's knight. A very nice composition by Kozlov. So what did we learn in this lesson? Well, in every attack usually the moment comes when it's time to strike and to convert our initiative, our attack, to material advantage or even checkmate. So always be on the lookout. And generally, here is a rule of thumb. Once your pieces are ideally positioned, once all your pieces are in ideal positions, usually that's the time to look for a way to strike. Of course, there are some other hints as well. For example, in the opponent's position, if there are pieces on unprotected squares, or there are pieces or a piece which is almost trapped, or if the king's position is really weak, there are weak squares in front of a king. So there are a number of hints that you can look out for in trying to find a tactic or a way to transform the strategical advantage or the attack to material gain. Hope you learned from this lesson, enjoyed our Jewel of the Week, and be back next week for some more chess knowledge. Bye bye.